Greetings, all! Today, we'll be examining the exceptionally rare Ground Steel type Pokemon Iron Treads, the Ice Water type Pokemon Iron Bundle, the Fighting Electric type Pokemon Iron Hands, the Dark Flying type Pokemon Iron Jugulis, the Fire Poison type Pokemon Iron Moth, the Rock Electric type Pokemon Iron Thorns, the Fairy Fire type Pokemon Iron Valiant, the Grass Saga type Pokemon Iron Leaves, the Rock Saga type Pokemon Iron Boulder, the Steel Saga type Pokemon Iron Crown, and the legendary Electric Dragon type Pokemon Miraidon, the group collectively known as the Paradox Pokémon. Mysterious in both their true origins and the power they once possessed in different times, the Paradox Pokémon are peculiar creatures whose power and dominance over their modern-day relatives can be more than apparent in any sort of fight.
Iron Treads have a form very similar to Donphan, but are distinguished by their grey, metal-covered main bodies, curved, semi-bladed feet that are used for locomotion, black eyes with red digital sclera, a pair of black spines on their sides to imitate ears, black tusks, and a red and black striped upper hide that can allow them to curl into a ball to roll around. Iron Bundle have a form very similar to Delibird, but are distinguished by their plated metal armor, blue eyes with black digital sclera, and having a large semi-open blue orb attached to their posterior by a blue and black striped host that they use to launch projectile attacks. Iron Hands have a form very similar to Hariyama, but are distinguished by the armor that covers most of their form, colored grey around the head, upper hands, and upper torso, yellow around the upper thighs and palms, black in the center of the lower torso and feet, and blue around the lower legs, and possess yellow eyes with black digital sclera, their hands further levitating off their frame, detached from the rest of their body. Iron Jugulis have a form very similar to Hydreigon, but are distinguished by the metallic outer bodies and the dazzling light that emanates from the pink shield rays around their necks. Iron Moth have a form very similar to Volcarona, but are distinguished by the metallic outer shells, deeper red crests along the side of their head, black cross-shaped pupils with orange digital sclera, and bladed orange wings with red lower tips that flow around the back of their form. Iron Thorns have a form very similar to Tyranitar, but are distinguished by the deeper green colored metallic outer armor with black accents on their feet, underarms, tail tip, lower jaw, and lower torso, large viewing ports on their torso and legs that display their internal contents, green energy spines on their back, and green eyes with black digital sclera. Iron Valiant have a form very similar to Gardevoir and Gallade, but are distinguished as a composite of the two, the metallic bodies being white on the outside and green on the inside, having the skirt and hairstyle of Gardevoir and the rounded hips and head crest of Gallade, further possessing pink tone markings and chest plate, pink eyes with black digital sclera, and wield a counter-bladed twin scythe-like blade usually attached to their arms for offense. Iron Leaves have a form very similar to Virizion, but are distinguished by the metallic outer frame, pink eyes with black digital sclera, and a pink sparkling stripe that runs along the top of their head that can be used to generate energy blades. Iron Boulder have a form very similar to Terrakion, but are distinguished by the grey metallic outer frame with gilded yellowish-orange cross-bracing on the legs and twin horns, a black ring around the front of the torso with two bladed structures on their back and further black metal on their horns, and gilded yellowish-orange eyes with black digital sclera. Iron Crown have a form very similar to Cobalion, but are distinguished by the blue metallic outer armor, blue tinted horns and upper head, and the blue eyes with black digital sclera. Lastly, Miraidon have a form very similar to Cyclizar, but are distinguished by the metallic dark blue bodies, grey and yellow tail with an energetic bolt of plasma at the tip, grey claws in the upper limbs, while the lower limbs typically remain folded up, dark blue head crest, electrically charged blue and yellow front neck with stripes of energy pulsating along its length and similar energy along its shoulder crest and upper arms, a grey metal mouth, burning blue eyes, yellow halo around them, and antenna-like structures on the side of their head that can be charged with energy when needed. Discovered 200 years ago within the area known as Area Zero, these beasts are what is known as Paradox Pokémon, creatures that have been brought into the present time from a time either in the distant past or the far future when they clearly don't belong here. In the case of these Pokémon, they have come into this world from the far future. Originally discovered and described by the researcher Heath in the Great Crater, the findings and descriptions of these beasts originally laughed off as figments of Heath's imagination, ruining his career. Before 10 years prior to the present, Professor Asada and Terrell discovered the creatures all over again, and they were brought into the present by a time machine that they and other researchers had built. While Koraidon and Miraidon were the first beasts to be brought into the present time, eventually others were brought in as well, and served as a point of great fascination for these two professors. However, they were eventually killed by Paradox Pokémon after an aggressive confrontation, and the fate of the lives in that of Area Zero was not revealed until very recent times to the public, even if knowledge of the Paradox Pokémon is still uncommon amongst the public at large. As far as these creatures go, those brought in from the future tend to show evidence of being radically futuristic variations of Pokémon that exist in the present day, almost all of them showing access to the Quark Drive ability, which gives a 30% boost to the strongest stat under electric terrain, or 50% if it's their speed stat. And while wild theories have been speculated by some as to their origins, it is uncertain whether they have direct relations to the Pokémon they're actually supposed to be related to by appearances alone, though this does little to belittle the destructive potential they actually have access to. While some dubious sources claim that Iron Treads are potentially some sort of alien weapon made to destroy others on Earth, The truth of the matter is that these beasts are actually machines that have been built to resemble and mimic some of the powers of current Donphan, but have been given different moves, type, and base stats as a consequence. Compared to normal Donphan, these beasts are ground steel types for one thing, having been granted steel type powers both offensively and defensively as a consequence of the thick and sturdy titanium used to construct their bodies. In addition, they are stronger in terms of the overall base stat total and feature a slightly decreased base attack stat, but slightly increased base special attack and special defense stats, and a cataclysmically increased base speed stat. Plus, their moveset is notably different, not only including the lengths of electric terrain to help activate their ability, as well as strengthen their wild charge attack, but also possessing several steel type attacks and a much larger move variety as a whole. These beasts are able to get around quickly by rolling their entire bodies into a tire shape, a form they also take on when they are asleep, and are able to traverse most types of terrain in this state to get where they need to go. It is thought that this is how one of them managed to escape Area Zero, ending up fatally harming a researcher in the process, as it took up residence in the Asado Desert as a Titan before being felled in recent times. Thankfully, much like the Pokemon they're based on, these creatures are actually fairly docile otherwise, and only attack creatures that come into their immediate airspace, and thus are possible to readily control. However, if they are sufficiently angered, they will more than show a ruthless side to them and make a menace out of themselves, requiring special assistance to return them to a calm and stable state. In regard to the stats, these brutes clearly show favor to their stamina, physical attributes, and mobility similar to normal Donphan, the base HP stat being above average for a fully evolved Steel-type Pokemon, and the base attack, defense, and speed stats being above average for a fully evolved Ground and Steel-type Pokemon, rendering them a serious force to contend with in close quarters. While some dubious sources claim that Iron Bundle are potentially the remnants of ancient technology left behind by an unknown civilization, the truth of the matter is that these beasts are actually machines that have been built to resemble and mimic some of the powers of Delibird, but have been given different moves, types, and base stats as a consequence. Compared to normal Delibird, these beasts are ice water types for one thing, having been stripped of their flying type attributes as a consequence of being primarily built for ground movement only, or so it seems. In addition, they are much stronger in terms of the overall base stat total, and feature a slightly increased base HP stat, a moderately increased base special defense stat, a considerably increased base attack stat, cataclysmically increased base special attack and speed stats, and a monstrously increased base defense stat. Plus, the moveset is notably different, not only including the likes of electric terrain to help activate their ability, but also possessing several water-type attacks and a much larger move variety as a whole. This was likely granted to them in order to make them far more efficient with transportation compared to living Delibird. These beasts are able to get around very quickly because of the large orb-like object hooked to their backside, which can fire both ice and super cold water to freeze the surroundings while simultaneously propelling them forward, allowing them to slip and slide wherever they wish to without having to rely on their short feet to walk from place to place. Thankfully, much like the Pokemon they are based on, these creatures are actually fairly docile and only attack others that come into their immediate space, and thus are possible to readily control. However, if they are sufficiently perturbed, they will more than show a ruthless side and make a menace out of themselves, requiring special assistance to return them to a calm and stable state. In regards to their stats, these mechanoids clearly show favor to the physical defenses, special power, and agility, the base defense, special attack, and speed stats being above average for fully evolved ice and water type Pokemon, further possessing the highest base speed stat out of all water type, tied with Barraskewda, and ice type Pokemon, rendering them a serious fleet-footed force to contend with from afar. Although some questionable sources claim that Iron Hands are the result of an injured athlete being kept alive by converting them into a cyborg, the truth of the matter is that these beasts are actually machines that have been built to resemble and mimic some of the powers of current Hariyama, but have been given different moves, types, and base stats as a consequence. Compared to normal Hariyama, these beasts are fighting electric types for one thing, having been granted electric type powers both offensively and defensively as a consequence of the physical structure of their forms. In addition, they are stronger in terms of overall base stat total, and feature slightly increased base HP, special attack and special defense stats, a moderately increased base attack stat, and a cataclysmically increased base defense stat. Plus, the moveset is notably different, not only including the likes of electric terrain to help activate their ability, but also moves like Charge, Thunder Punch, and Wild Charge, having a much larger move variety as a whole. These beasts have hands that float separately from the rest of their frame, coupled to the rest of their body by electromagnetism, and they have the strength needed to pick up and hurl cars with just a single hand, thus demonstrating the immense power at their disposal. Even so, much like the Pokemon they are based on, these creatures are actually quite placid otherwise, and only attack those that come into their immediate space, and thus are possible to readily control. However, if they are sufficiently angered, they will more than show a ruthless side and make a menace out of themselves, requiring special assistance to return them to a calm and stable state. In regards to their stats, these mechanoids clearly show favor to their physical attributes and stamina, their base HP attack and defense stats being above average for fully evolved fighting and electric type Pokemon, further possessing the highest base attack stat out of all non-legendary electric and fire type Pokemon, tied with Conkeldurr for the latter, the highest base HP stat out of all electric and fire type Pokemon, and the highest base stat total out of all non-legendary electric type Pokemon, tied with Zeriartwo, Sandy Shocks, and Iron Thorns, overall rendering them a serious threat and long-lasting force to contend with up close. While some may claim that Iron Jugulis are the result of Hydreigon somehow producing offspring with a robot, The truth of the matter is that these beasts are actually machines that have been built to resemble and mimic some of the powers of the real deal, but have been given different moves, types, and base stats as a consequence. Compared to normal Hydreigon, these beasts are dark flying types for one thing, having been stripped of their dragon-type attributes as a consequence of the dragon-type's powers being difficult to fully copy into a machine. Or so it seems. In addition, they are a bit weaker in terms of overall base stat total, and feature slightly decreased base defense, special attack and special defense stats, and a considerably decreased base attack stat, but also slightly increased base HP and speed stats, and the moveset is notably different, not only including the likes of electric terrain to help activate the ability, but also possessing many more special attacks than physical ones naturally. This is likely granted to them in order to overcome the prevailing issue the Hydreigon normally have for the lack of natural special attacks, because their pre-evolved forms have greater physical strength and special strength to them. The 3 heads on these creatures operate more as LED displays in this state, only lighting up when they are active and awake, and their jointed forms as a whole have the look of something clearly assembled in a factory of some sort, propelled into the air by an unsteady but likely advanced propulsion system of some sort. While there are reports of one apparently having razed an entire building to the ground with an energy blast, in stark comparison to the Pokemon they are based on, these creatures are actually fairly docile and only attack those that come into the immediate airspace, and thus are possible to readily control. However, if they are sufficiently angered, they will more than show a ruthless side to them and make a menace out of themselves, requiring special assistance to return them to a calm and stable state. In regards to the stats, these mechanoids are well rounded in their power and suffer from few major issues, with only their base attack and special defense stats being below average for fully evolved dark and flying type Pokemon, overall rendering them a noble force to contend with in battle. Even though dubious sources claim that Iron Moth are actually unidentified flying objects sent to the Earth to observe humans, the truth of the matter is that these beasts are actually machines that have been built to resemble and mimic some of the powers of Volcarona, but have been given different moves, types, and base stats as a consequence. Compared to normal Volcarona, these beasts are fire poison types for one thing, having been stripped of their bug-type attributes as a consequence of the bug-type's power being difficult to fully copy into a machine, or so it seems. In addition, they are a bit stronger in terms of overall base stat total, and feature slightly decreased base HP and defense stats, but slightly increased base attack, special attack, and special defense and speed stats, and the moveset is notably different, not only including the likes of electric terrain to help activate the ability, but also possessing access to moves like Acid Spray and Sludge Wave. The addition of such moves likely comes from the extreme coolant that they pump through their bodies in order to keep themselves from overheating with their intense fire-type powers. Their wings don't actually function as proper wings, instead being disconnected from the main body and only held in place via electromagnetism, with a strong advanced propulsion system keeping them held aloft in their place. Thankfully for most, much of the Pokemon they're based on, these creatures are actually fairly docile and only attack those that come into the immediate airspace and thus can be readily controlled. However, if they are angered enough, they will more than show a ruthless side and can make a true menace out of themselves, requiring potent physical force to return them to a calm and stable state. In regards to their stats, these mechanoids clearly show favor to the special attributes and agility, the base special attack, special defense, and speed stats being above average for fully evolved fire and poison type Pokemon, further possessing the highest base special attack stat and base stat total out of all non-legendary poison type Pokemon, as well as the highest base stat total out of all non-legendary fire type Pokemon, tied with Blacephalon, overall rendering them a noble force to contend with from afar. Despite some sources claiming that Iron Thorns is a Tyranitar that has evolved from a billion years into the future, the truth of the matter is that these beasts are actually machines that have been built to resemble and mimic some of the powers of the real deal, but have been given different moves, types, and base stats as a consequence. Compared to normal Tyranitar, these beasts are rock electric types for one thing, having been stripped of their dark type attributes as a consequence of them being built for a different function and combat preference, most likely to avoid the otherwise massive weakness of fine type attacks, or so it seems. In addition, they are a bit weaker in terms of overall base stat total, and feature a moderately decreased base special defense stat and a considerably decreased base special attack stat, but also a slightly increased base speed stat, and the moveset is notably different, not only including the likes of electric terrain to help activate the ability, but also possessing many more electric type attacks than might otherwise be expected. This is all likely a consequence of the thick, electrolytic green goo that fills much of their body cavity, which seems to not only fuel their bodies but also act as a perfect way to generate and conduct electrical energy, their entire bodies being equipped to emit this energy as a weapon if absolutely needed, both offensively and defensively, with moves like Charge and Wild Charge, plus their armored and barbed bodies can even allow them to learn the Pin Missile attack. In stark contrast to the Pokemon they're based on, these creatures are extremely intelligent and actually fairly cool-headed, preferring to avoid conflict altogether and only attack those that come into the immediate space, and thus can be readily controlled. However, if they are angered enough, they will more than show a ruthless side and make a menace out of themselves, requiring special assistance to return them to a calm and stable state. In regards to their stats, these mechanoids show an odd balance of attributes with a stronger focus on the physical traits, the base special attack and speed stats being above average for fully evolved rock-type Pokemon, the base defense and special defense stats being above average for fully evolved electric-type Pokemon, and the base HP and attack stats being above average for fully evolved rock and electric-type Pokemon, further possessing the highest base stat total out of all non-legendary electric-type Pokemon, tied with circuitry, sandy shocks, and iron hands, and rendering them a true force to contend with in practice. Some dubious sources may claim that Iron Valiant are the result of a mad scientist trying to create the most powerful Psychic-type Pokemon to ever exist, but the truth of the matter is uncertain, though it seems if they did, they failed, as these creatures work as a fusion of Gallade and Gardevoir in appearance and inherited both halves of their non-psychic attributes. As such, these beasts are fairy fighting types, having been stripped of their Psychic-type attributes as a consequence of their unique construction. In addition, they are weaker in terms of overall base stat total compared to the Mega equivalents, but also stronger than their default forms, with weakened defensive stats countered by a mixture of high offensive stats and a high base speed stat. And the moveset is notably different, not only including the likes of electric terrain to help activate the ability, but also possessing a strong mix of both physical and special attacks to mimic the combined powers that supposedly led to their creation in the first place. While these entities are able to harness the natural powers for special attacks much like Gardevoir, when it comes to physical attacks, they specialize in using the two blades attached to their arms as their primary weapon of choice, and can even temporarily detach them from their limbs and combine them together to make a double-bladed, brilliantly shining weapon capable of slicing through flesh, bone, and metal with little issue. This is matched by an exceptional streak of cruelty that seems to run through them, as they will not hesitate to cut down others that get in the way or so much as look at them funny. Outside of this, however, they do seem to be rather docile and only attack those that enter their immediate space, thus making it possible to avoid them as long as they are not confronted directly in any way. In regards to the stats, these Mechadroids clearly show favor to the offenses and agility, with only their base HP and special defense stats being below average for fully evolved Fairy and Flying-type Pokemon, further possessing the highest base attack stat out of all non-legendary Fairy-type Pokemon, the highest base special attack stat out of all non-legendary and non-UB Fighting-type Pokemon, and the highest base stat total out of all non-legendary Fairy-type Pokemon, overall rendering them a terrifying force to contend with in any combat scenario. Although the exact origin of the creature is not totally understood, it is widely believed that Iron Leaves is a futuristic robotic version of Virizion that has taken on a far more aggressive role in the way that it interacts with its environment, having a more rigid stance in its form with a more calculated mechanical sense of mind with how it approaches others. Compared to normal Virizion, these beasts are grass Psychic types for one thing, possessing more energy-based powers than the modern iterations, and with a much greater emphasis on said elemental attributes, as well as a wider variety of attacks at their disposal in general. In addition, they are a bit stronger in terms of overall base stat total, and feature slightly decreased base HP and speed stats, moderately decreased base special attack and special defense stats, a moderately increased base defense stat, and a critically increased base attack stat. And the moveset is notably different, not only including the likes of electric terrain to help activate the ability, but also possessing moves like Quash and Megahorn, and an overall more physically offensive moveset than the modern iterations are known to possess. Moreover, they are noted for their access to a unique signature attack, the Side Blade attack, which is fairly potent on its own, but actually increases in power in the presence of electric terrain, a unique attribute that can make it a powerful weapon to turn to in the right circumstances. Outside of this, little is known about these creatures, as they've only been spotted a handful of times by researchers in the underground depths and dens of the Paldea region, but it is known that these monsters are extremely ruthless creatures and will strike down all the dead to confront them, much unlike the common disposition of modern Virizion. What really stands out about them, however, is the fact that these creatures possess several open energy ports on the sides of the neck and the top of their head that can be energized and extended to form a trio of ethereal blades that they can then use to Julian other beasts from quite some distance away, and even trees of boulders on occasion. The blades with psychic energy proving to be an effective weapon against non-dark types and others that do not otherwise resist the damaging power of psychic energy. The design of these weapons has intrigued researchers in many scientific fields, but understanding how they function will require more study to fully understand, as well how they are totally absent from the confines of Area Zero, despite assumingly arising from there in the first place. The extreme power of these beasts' wield can make them a terrible threat to many, and their aggressive natures can make them a challenge to handle, as do their stats, as they are only weak in special attack as the fully evolved grass and Psychic-type Pokemon, so extreme caution is recommended when confronting these creatures to avoid as much bodily injury as possible. While the exact biological origin of this creature is not totally understood, it is widely believed that Iron Boulder is a futuristic robotic form of Terrakion that has taken on a far more aggressive role in the way it interacts with its environment, having a more rigid stance in its form with a more calculated mechanical sense of mind with how it approaches others. Compared to normal Terrakion, these beasts are rock Psychic types for one thing, possessing more energy-based and bladed powers than their modern iterations, with a much greater emphasis on said elemental attribute, as well as a wider variety of attacks at their disposal in general. In addition, they are a bit stronger in terms of overall base stat total, and feature slightly decreased base HP attack and defense stats, a moderately decreased base special attack stat, and moderately increased base special defense and speed stats. And the moveset is notably different, not only including the likes of electric terrain to help activate the ability, but also possessing moves like Agility and Megahorn, and an overall more diverse moveset than their modern iterations are known to possess. Moreover, they are noted for the access to a unique signature attack, the Mighty Cleave attack, which is fairly potent on its own and has the capacity to bypass any and all types of energy barriers that otherwise block most other attacks, a unique attribute that can make it a powerful weapon in the right circumstances. Outside of this, little is known about these creatures, as they've only been spotted a handful of times by researchers in the confines of Area Zero in the Paldea region, but it is known that these monsters are extremely ruthless creatures said to have been corrupted by an evil organization in the future and will strike down all that dare to confront them, much unlike the common disposition of modern Terrakion. What really stands out about them, however, is the fact that these creatures possess several open energy ports on the front of their head that can be energized and temporarily fused together to form a single massive bladed horn that they can then use to pierce other beasts from some distance away. The blade of laser energy proving to be an effective weapon against non-dark types and others that do not otherwise resist the damaging power of laser energy. The design of these weapons has intrigued researchers in many scientific fields, but understanding how they function will require more study to fully understand. The extreme power of these beasts' wield can make them a terrible threat to many, and their aggressive natures can make them a challenge to handle, as do their stats, with only their base defense stat being below average for fully evolved rock-type Pokemon, and the base special attack stat being below average for fully evolved rock and Psychic-type Pokemon. So extreme caution is recommended when confronting these creatures to avoid as much bodily injury as possible. Even if the exact biological origin of this creature is not totally understood, it is widely believed that Iron Crown is a futuristic robotic form of Cobalion that has taken on a far more aggressive role in the way it interacts with its environment, having a more rigid stance in its form with a more calculated mechanical sense of mind with how it approaches others. Compared to normal Cobalion, these beasts are steel Psychic types for one thing, possessing more energy-based and bladed powers than their modern iterations, with a much greater emphasis on said elemental attributes, as well as a wide variety of attacks at their disposal in general. In addition, they're a bit stronger in terms of overall base stat total, and feature slightly decreased base HP and speed stats, a moderately decreased base attack stat, a considerably decreased base defense stat, a considerably increased base special attack stat, and a critically increased base special defense stat, and the moveset is notably different, not only including the likes of electric terrain to help activate their ability, but also possessing moves like Side Shock and Volt Switch, and an overall more diverse moveset than their modern iterations are known to possess. Moreover, they are noted for their access to a unique signature attack, the Tachyon Cutter attack, which is fairly potent on its own and has the capacity to not only strike an opponent twice in quick succession, but also never misses its target, a unique attribute that can make it a powerful weapon in the right circumstances. Outside of this, little is known about these creatures, as they've only been spotted a handful of times by researchers in the confines of Area Zero in the Paldea region, but it is known that these monsters are extremely ruthless creatures that act like living weapons, launching shining energy blades from their horns to slice apart everything that surrounds them with little care, much unlike the common disposition of modern Cobalion. What really stands out about them, however, is the fact that these creatures possess several open energy ports on the front of their horns that can be energized to project a pair of powerful energy blades they can then use to slice apart others like buzzsaws. The blades of light energy proving to be an effective weapon against non-dark types and others that do not otherwise resist the damaging power of light energy. The design of these weapons has intrigued researchers in many scientific fields, but understanding how they function will require more study to fully understand. The extreme power of these beasts' wield can make them a terrible threat to many, and their aggressive natures can make them a challenge to handle, as do their stats, with only their base defense stat being below average for a fully evolved Steel-type Pokemon, and the base attack stat being below average for a fully evolved Steel and Psychic-type Pokemon. So extreme caution is recommended when confronting these creatures to avoid as much bodily injury as possible. Miraidon are notably distinct from the other Paradox Pokémon alongside Koraidon, in that they can be used for both combat and for traversing different types of terrain, and are known to assume 5 different forms depending on the type of mobility they need in order to overcome physical obstacles in the wild. Low Power Mode, which is the default state they take when they are relaxing, otherwise injured or tired. Drive Mode, when they are traveling swiftly across the land. Aquatic Mode, when they are traveling through the water. Glide Mode, when they extend gliding wings from the sides of their head and use their advanced propulsion systems to travel through the skies. And Ultimate Mode, where they assume their full strength for direct combat. Their versatility is incredible compared to limited movement capabilities of their modern-day ancestors, and makes it so these creatures can effectively traverse any sort of environment, no matter how vast or rugged it may be. Compared to Cyclosaur, these beasts are Dragon Electric types, having lost their normal-type attributes and gained Electric-type attributes in the specialization and powerful electrocuting attacks. In addition, they are much stronger in terms of overall base stat total, and feature a slightly decreased base attack stat, moderately increased base speed stat, a considerably increased base HP stat, a critically increased base defense stat, and astronomically increased base special attack and special defense stats. Plus, the moveset is notably different, not including many more powerful attacks with some variety, but also the signature Electro Drift attack. Moreover, these beasts have access to unique ability in the form of the Hadron Engine ability, which harnesses the immense energy hidden within them to alter the environment to seemingly set up electric terrain and increase the special attack stat of the possessor of the ability when present in said terrain. These beasts are far more ruthless and powerful compared to their modern-day counterparts, and have such immense strength that they can produce anything on the ground to ash with their electrical powers. But while they are more than aware of their incredible might, these creatures have a calm and collected disposition, and it can be very hard to tell what they are thinking or feeling due to their robotic nature, their eyes being the only hints towards these mental states. But at the very least, it can be said that they use this power of insight and observation to carefully judge a person's character before they decide to join them or not. In battle, they prefer to remain afloat to maintain an advantageous position that applies pressure to grounded opponents, anticipating their moves before striking at their weak points. In particular, they use electricity generated in their internal organs to charge their claws, fangs, and tail before lashing out at them as part of their Electro Drift attack, Plus, the stats more than reflect this power, the base attack stat being the only one that is below average for fully evolved Dragon-type Pokemon, and in turn are terrifying beings whose power should never be underestimated. While these creatures are usually kept out of the spotlight, the only two known to have been brought into the modern world did play a key role in the events of the Paradox incident that has recently occurred in the Paldea region. As noted before, while the first one of these specimens to be brought back from a different time was easy to care for, it got into a territorial dispute when Professor Turo summoned a second one and ended up getting killed by the second specimen and trying to protect the first one from harm, forcing the Zero Lab with the time machine built in there to shut down, allowing more Paradox Pokemon to escape from it as the AI copy took charge and tried to disable the machine, but to no avail, and with the original Miraidon making it out of the lab, only to collapse and be rescued and slowly healed by a student at the Paldea Academy. Eventually, a group of kids, including among them the same student Turo's son, made it to the heart of Zero Lab, where they discovered that the AI who had been programmed to keep the machine running merely wished to end the ambitions of the original creators to explore the distant future in order to contain the Paradox Pokemon that had managed to escape from the machine. However, the Time Machine's protection protocol overpowered the AI and forced them to fight the intruding students as the machine went into full lockdown, and while they were defeated by the students that had been summoned to assist them, the system locked all of the captured devices, as the last thing standing in the way of keeping the world safe was the Miraidon that had killed the original Professor Turo. With the chips down and all the students' Pokemon locked inside the devices by the Time Machine's protection protocol, they had no choice but to help restore the full fighting power of the original Miraidon, and with encouragement, it was able to assume its full power once more and defeat the enemy Miraidon in battle. With this done, in order to keep the machine from being used for unmitigated ambition again, the AI Turo chose to use the device to travel to the distant future, and in doing so, they were able to shut down the device for good. While the resulting conflict caused Area Zero to become flooded with Paradox Pokemon, for now, it seems that they are contained, and the world may be saved once more from these bizarre beasts.
As a bit of an anomaly myself as far as Pokemon go, I can definitely understand why a lot of people would be concerned and scared of these beasts from the far future, as far as we can tell, and I can say these creatures really do stand out from the pack, and while they are supposedly from this planet, just in the far future, I still feel rather unique in that context. Even if they are alien creatures from another world, they still have plenty of potent and unique characteristics that make them material to have to face in a lot of cases, and their quirky powers and strong response to electricity more than render them beasts to be wary of. I do have to wonder here, though, how they see themselves in this new unfamiliar world. For them, their memories likely span a time of massive futuristic cities and advanced technology, and while it is not entirely far from the present, they still have to deal with us, and that always throws a wrench into getting anything really taken care of in practice. I can't really say for certain if I'd ever want to travel to the far future after seeing these beasts, but I can definitely say that anyone unfortunate enough to have to make that trip in time is in for a world of pain if they go unprepared.
Equally terrifying and mystifying to the few that can gaze upon them, the Paradox Pokemon are truly powerful creatures that can more than be a dire threat to anyone that assumes they can be beaten just as easily as their modern-day lookalikes. The chances of ever seeing one in person might be all but impossible outside of Area Zero, but for anyone that gets special permission to head in that way, you'd best be ready to take them on in a heck of a confrontation if you get too close to them.
As such, do yourself a favor and make sure that you're ready to take on these futuristic creatures with everything at your disposal, or they might just crush you with the might of the far future like no other.
Thank you all for watching this video. It always brings me great joy to see others enjoying the work I do to try and make the world of Pokemon and the fascinating creatures that lay inside of it feel as real as they possibly can. If you really enjoy my work, please feel free to leave a comment and subscribe, as I always do my best to respond to any and all comments that are left on my videos. In addition, if you wish to learn more about my work and help support it, you can find links to my Patreon page, as well as email and other contact information to my work on DeviantArt in the video description down below. Furthermore, you can find a link to my Discord server there as well if you'd like to get a first glimpse at what videos are coming up next and converse with other fans of the world of Pokemon. Thank you for taking the time to watch this, and have a wonderful rest of your day.